everyone. Happy Wednesday. We're back again. I hope you guys enjoyed your 3-day weekend and had a good time kind of wishing the summer a happy ending. And here we are. I can't believe it's already September and we're working our way into the last quarter of the year. And, September is an important month in the real estate market, especially this year because of what we've been hearing with the Fed and interest rates. And it looks like we're going to be getting an interest rate cut. So some good news for buyers. However, there's always talk of a real estate crash. So today we're going to talk about when the real estate market is actually going to crash. A little bit of a spoiler alert. I don't know if it's actually going to. So we've got 3 articles to take a look at today. One from Bankrate, another one from Forbes, and another one from Housing Wire. All 3 really good sources, have a lot of good content. And of course, at any time, if you guys have any questions, comments, and you want to sound off on the opinion of the article or my interpretation, my opinion, go ahead, pop it in the comments and let me know what you think. Do you think there's going to be a housing crash? If you do think there's going to be a housing crash, why? I would love to know. If you guys are enjoying the stream and you find the content useful, please go ahead and drop a like right now on the stream just below. Give it a thumbs up. And also consider subscribing to the channel. It doesn't cost anything, and it really, really helps out the channel and the stream. So without any further ado, let's get the first article pulled up on the screen here. And so this one's from Bankrate. And this is kind of where I got the inspiration for the title of the stream tonight. Is the housing market going to crash? What the experts are saying. If you guys have watched my streams or watched my videos on my channel, you know that one of my favorite things to do is to hate on the crash bros. Crash bros are the people not just on YouTube, mostly YouTube, but on social media of any type that just are incessant that the real estate market is going to crash. And there's a couple big ones out there. Some of the biggest ones have now pivoted a little bit where they said a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago during the pandemic, oh, there's going to be a huge housing crash, bigger than 2008. And the biggest one of them all, or one of the biggest ones of them all, is now pivoting. And he's now going, oh, well, actually, Florida's real estate's going to crash, which is completely different, right? Because a 2008 style crash was across the entire nation, affected other markets internationally. It was a really, really big problem. A lot of people got wiped out. And now he's kind of backtracking, going, actually, it's just maybe going to be like some problems in Florida, which has its own set of issues, which, we can get into later on in the stream. But at any rate, so is the housing market going to crash? And what are the actual experts saying? So let's dive in. Key takeaways. Mortgage rates are finally ticking downward, but at the same time, home prices are reaching historic highs. Economists predict that any market correction will be modest and not on the scale of the Great Recession. Experts do not expect a housing market crash due to low inventory, strict lending standards, and other factors. And this is what actual real estate professionals have been saying since really about a year into the pandemic, since about 2021 or so, when people thought there's no way that this could continue. It's kind of interesting because, again, true real estate professionals, whether that's real estate agents, brokers, mortgage professionals, finance people, it doesn't really matter. We've been saying this for a while, but again, the non-real estate professionals, the crash bros, the people kind of hyping things up on social media, they're not going for it, and they're insisting that there's a crash. And it's really simple. It's because that's what gets people to click, right? Which is part of the reason I named the stream. This is when real estate will actually crash. Like I said, really quickly, I'm not going to lead you guys on. Only 4.5 minutes in the stream, I'm going to tell you it's not going to happen. But we're going to dive in and we're going to talk about why it's not going to happen. To the dismay of would-be homebuyers, property prices just keep rising. And before I go any further, I want to scroll up. I always like to show you guys the date of this article. So this is published on August 25th. As you can see, we're talking about recent stuff. I only like to use recent articles. I usually only go back about a week or two because I want it to be as relevant and as applicable as possible. It seems nothing, not even some of the highest mortgage rates of the past 2 decades, can stop the continued climb of home prices. Are they destined for a fall? Here's what the experts say about a potential housing market crash. Market fluctuations. The US housing market had finally started slowing in late 2022, and home prices seemed poised for a correction. But a strange thing happened on the way to the housing market crash. Home values started rising again. So much for the now quaint notion that the post-pandemic housing recession would reverse some of the outsized price gains in homes. And that's kind of what we thought. We thought, okay, what's going to happen is you're going to get people that had these, ideas that, hey, the pandemic properties went up too far, too fast in pricing. They became very unaffordable. If you're looking at a income to price, like the Case-Shiller index, for example, that really basically correlates home pricing to income. And that's been a very bedrock metric. It's been a keystone for housing professionals for a really long time. And I understand why, right? I understand if incomes can support housing prices, then chances are home prices are where they should be. If incomes can't support housing prices, then we know we're a little bit out of whack, which is where we have been. But unfortunately, this thought that, hey, after the pandemic is over and once things get back to normal, we're going to see these huge gains recede and come back down, and home prices will level out. And that did not happen. And it hasn't happened, and it doesn't look like it's going to happen. And perhaps in some markets it will, like your Florida, like Texas, perhaps in places like Idaho, but it hasn't happened across the nation, certainly not at the scale of 2008. And one of the articles that I'm going to share with you has a really, really good graph. And that's going to be the last one we're going to take a look at. There's a really good graphic that kind of talks about where inventory is at. And I got news for you. Inventory is one of the biggest reasons, if not the single biggest reason, as to why we're seeing home prices continue to escalate. Not at the pace that we saw in 2020, 2021, 2022. However, they're still escalating. Prices hit a new all-time high in June of 2024, with the median sale price for an existing home reaching $426,900, according to the National Association of Realtors. July's median price was slightly lower at $422,600, but was still the highest July median on record and marked 13 consecutive months of year-over-year jumps, the absolute opposite of a housing crash. Seasonal fluctuations in home prices typically make late spring and early summer the highest price times of the year, which, we've known that for a little while. That is the spring and summer buying and selling season. Kids are out of school or almost out of school. People have saved up on some vacation days so they can kind of go with the moving itinerary if they need to. And also too, I'm here in Los Angeles, or the suburbs of Los Angeles. I'm about 35 miles east of downtown LA in a town called Claremont, California, still technically LA County. Here, it's always sunny, right? The weather is pretty pleasant, which is why a lot of people like to live here. But in a lot of the United States, the weather in the wintertime is pretty harsh and doesn't really facilitate moving. So another factor as to why the spring and summer months continue to be the hot months for buying and selling. Not only do you have kids, ending the school year, and it's kind of a good time. It's a kind of a good spot to make a change, but also the weather is conducive to that as well. This is Lawrence Yun. This is a picture of our buddy Lawrence Yun. He is he's the chief economist at the National Association of Realtors, and I like him. I like his analysis. I think it's fair. I think he has good analyses of data and information when it relates to the housing market. And while you might have a certain thing, like the source is the National Association of Realtors, of course they're going to, have these stats in a certain slant or view or light. That's not the case, at least not with Lawrence Yun stuff. I've been following him for a very long time, several years now, since the COVID pandemic. And I really do think Lawrence Yun, like most economists, really takes a look at it, data driven, which is what we really need. And according to Mr. Yun, prices will remain firm and will not decline on a national level. Sorry to burst your bubble, Crash Bros. But that's what we're thinking. In another reflection of ongoing increases, the S&P CoreLogic Case-Shiller Home Price Index for May was up 5.9% from a year earlier in its third consecutive all-time high, which again, we kind of talked about what the Case-Shiller Home Price Index is and how it relates to home pricing and income. Supply and demand, right? This is the big one. This is the main driver of why we're experiencing what we're experiencing in the real estate market, not just in my market, certainly in my market, but not just my market, but overall as a whole, as a nation. The main driver of record home prices is a 1-2 punch straight from Econ 101, a lack of housing supply coupled with strong demand. Inventories have been growing, but remain frustratingly tight, with NAR's July data showing a 4-month supply. Now, 4-month supply, let's break this down really quick. What is, when we say what is a 4-month supply? Right. So a 4-month supply means that if no new homes were to come on the market starting right now, if there was like a moratorium of putting your home onto the market, that means that we would able to fulfill the demand for home buyers for 4 months with the current inventory. So what does this mean though? Right, what is a 4-month supply? What does that mean? And what does it mean if you're a buyer or you're a seller? Well, a 4-month supply is still on the low side. During the depths of the pandemic, we saw 1.5 and 2 months, which is like crazy low. That's like, there's no houses out there available. We hovered between 3 and 4 for a really long time, for probably about 2 years, from late 2022 to really like late 2023, and maybe even into early 2024. And now we're at a 4-month supply. However, a balanced market, a market that is fair and equal, so that means a market that is not tilted towards buyers, nor a market that is tilted towards sellers. It's an even, fair market, is when we get to about 6 months of supply. So you might think, oh, well, we're pretty close, for 4 months, 6 months, we're not that far away, which we're going in the right direction, right? We're going the right way, which is good. But it's not easy to increase supply of homes. So just going from 4 months to 5 months would be tough. That's a tall order. And going from 4 months to 6 months, that's not anticipated to happen anytime soon. So a 4-month supply, we're going in the right direction. We have a good, we're making some good progress, but we're not where we need to be. Not even high mortgage rates have slowed price appreciation. And again, remember, typically when rates go up, prices will start to come down or at least hold steady. And that has not been the case. This is probably the first time in, gosh, I don't want to say forever, because I don't have that data on me and I'm not aware of it. But this is the first time in a really, really long time that interest rates have gone up and prices have gone up. Usually that it does not work that way. For instance, in October of 2023, home values held steady even as mortgage rates soared to 8%, their highest level in more than 23 years. They have since dipped, hovering around 7% for most of 2024, but finally falling below it. The average in Bank Rates Weekly survey released August 21st was 6.62%. We are seeing some loans now fall under 6.5%, which is a pretty big milestone. That's good. If you're willing to pay a discount point or half of a discount point, which a discount point is usually a certain percentage of the outstanding loan. Usually it's 1% of the loan. So if you say, hey, bank, if I'm taking out a $500,000 loan, I'll pay you $5,000 upfront as a fee, but the interest rate's going to come down 0.5%, usually something like that. So if you're willing to pay a discount point, you can even get mortgage loans at an interest rate of under 6%. Obviously, you have to have really good credit, and that's going to come with a good down payment on the house, but it is possible and it's out there. So Greg McBride, chief financial analyst for Bankrate, says the fundamental reason for the run-up in price is heightened demand and lack of supply. And it really is Econ 101, right? When you have nothing of a commodity, when you have very low supply of a commodity that's in high demand, the price is going to go up. And when you have huge supply of commodity that's not in demand, prices are going to go down. They're going to go down quickly. And we can see this in the housing market. You think, okay, well, what's a real world example of this? Well, take 2009, 2010, right? We had a wave of foreclosures because of a ton of bad mortgages. So we had a bunch of really bad mortgages. We had a bunch of loans that were given to people who could not qualify or shouldn't have qualified for them, right? They didn't have the income. They had poor credit scores. They just didn't have the assets. Maybe they didn't even have a job, but they got a loan. Well, when the bell tolled and the introductory low interest rate offer was over and these people had to pay huge payments now all of a sudden, boom, foreclosures. What did that lead to? That led to a flood of inventory onto the market. And when you had a flood of inventory onto the market and you couple that with very low demand because so many people financially got blown to smithereens, they couldn't even think about buying a house or moving up, trading their small house for a bigger house or moving up or anything like that. So we had a huge supply increase. We had a pretty measurable decrease in demand, and that led to a huge crash in prices. And that's why real estate from 2009 to about 2014 was extremely, extremely affordable and very reasonable. And if you were one of the lucky few to buy a house during that time, kudos to you because you got a great deal. And hopefully there's some people out there in the chat. If you did buy a house during that time, let me know. Let me know what you paid for the property and where you purchased it. I always love to hear of success stories of people getting a good deal on real estate. You are not going to see house prices decline, says Ricky Arviello, head of the mortgage firm New American Funding, which, by the way, New American Funding is a huge, huge lending outfit. There's just not enough inventory. Skylar Olson, chief economist at Zillow, agrees about the supply and demand imbalance. She predicts home prices will keep rising for the rest of this year. Welcome news for sellers, but not so great for first-time buyers struggling to become homeowners. We're not in that space where things are suddenly going to be more affordable, which, is a real disappointment. We need to figure out a way to open the door to homeownership for first-time buyers. If you already own a home, then great. This is wonderful. It doesn't really matter if home prices go up because you're going to be able to sell your house for more. And yes, you're going to have to pay more for the next home. But if you make more money in equity on your current home, then it's kind of a wash. However, if you're a first-time home buyer, it's really, really important to try to position yourself to get into something, right? I'm not saying that you need to buy a house right now. That would be a foolish statement. There's a lot of factors that go into whether or not a buyer or buyers are ready to actually purchase a home. However, there's a saying, it's not about timing the market, it's about time in the market. It's just like anything else, it's like a savings account, it's like the stock market, it's like investments. You put a little money in, and sure, if you check that account balance every day, you're not going to see any increase. What's it going to go up $1 or $2 a month or, whatever the investment is, but it's a long-term play, right? It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so for home buyers or potential home buyers, it's really important to realize, like, if you are renting right now, especially if you're renting, it might look cheaper on the surface to continue renting, but I've got news for you. And you can compare this. There's calculators there, right? There's the cost of renting, the cost of waiting calculators. If you can't find one online, or if you want more info about this, just drop a comment or send me a message or an email or text me or whatever, and I'll be happy to give you this information so that you can see for yourself that renting might be more affordable over the first maybe 1 to 3 years. But from about four years on, it really becomes a losing proposition in terms of, like a sound financial investment. So maybe now is not the best time to buy for everyone, but at the end of the day, it's always a good time to start to get equity, because I got news, and it's backed up by people at Zillow and major mortgage corporations and the National Association of Realtors. Home prices are not going to get much better. So if you can start building that equity now, do it. And I know what you might be thinking. You might be thinking, I don't want to pay $400,000 for a condo. Then I have to pay HOA fees. I understand all that. HOA fees suck, right? High interest rates suck. I understand that. Having to pay, what appears to be at the top of the market pricing for property, it sucks. I get it. I understand. But if you can just get your foot in the door and start building equity, it's going to allow you to utilize that equity to roll it into the next property. And I did that. That's how I bought my second house. The first house I bought was kind of crap. It was kind of crappy. And it needed a ton of work. Like, I mean, it was so crappy. Like, there were holes in the floor. So like when you walked into the bathroom, if you didn't watch your step, you would fall through the floor and you'd go into the crawl space of the property. And like the shower, like you couldn't even turn the shower on. Like, there were no knobs. There was no shower head. There was like unpainted drywall. It was a mess, but we bought that house. We fixed it up. We lived in it for a few years, and then we sold it when the market went up, and we were able to buy a house that we thought we would never be able to purchase. And it all was because of that first house. And any homeowner, especially a homeowner that's been in the market for like 10, 15, 20, 25 years, like, talk to your parents, talk to your grandparents, talk to a trusted friend at work that's maybe been a homeowner for a little while, and ask them, like, how did you feel when you bought your home? Did you feel like you were like overpaying for it? Did you feel stretched? Did you feel like you couldn't afford it? Did you feel like, man, this is really, really difficult? And I bet you anything that they will say, yes, it felt like an insurmountable task. It felt like we were going to be poor forever. But then the market got better. The market grew. They got equity. They were able to roll into the next home or the next home. And now they're probably living very comfortably. And that can only happen if you purchase the first house. So again, I'm not saying that right now is the best time for everyone to buy a home, but if you're able to get that down payment together, even if it means borrowing some money from friends or family, even if it means but not having the most desirable home in your mind, maybe that means a condo instead of a single family home. Maybe that means a small condo instead of a large condo. Maybe that means, living 60 minutes outside of the city as opposed to 30 minutes or 20 minutes, or living in the city. The point is, you just have to try to do it any way that you can, because again, it's like saving for retirement. It's like an investment. The later you start, the steeper the hill gets. And I know the hill might look steep now, but it will only be steeper. So just keep that in mind for all the would-be home buyers out there. The picture might look grim, especially with these articles that we're going over, but I promise you home ownership is worth it. And it's the key to long-term financial security. And not only that, you don't ever have to worry about a landlord giving you a 60-day notice to move out. You don't ever have to worry about a landlord posting a notice on your door that says, hey, I'm selling the property that you live in. You got to go. Or I just sold a property to another investor. They're going to jack up your rent by 30%, which is all very real possibilities. Okay. Taking all of this into account, housing economists and analysts agree that any market correction is likely to be modest. No one expects price drops on the scale of the declines during the Great Recession, which, again, sorry, Crash Bros. I know that there is a ton out there that will say that we're on that trajectory, and we simply are not, at least as of right now, right? Anything could happen. We could have a crazy war break out, which kind of doesn't maybe seem super unlikely. We could have, we have an election coming up, could change things based on who gets elected. Maybe, the Fed does something crazy and decides to cut rates drastically or not cut rates at all. And then maybe, things change. But for right now, the Great Recession, you can wave it goodbye. It's going to be in the rearview mirror. It's not coming back to haunt us anytime soon. Is the housing market going to crash? I love this, right? The Crash Bros would hate this answer. The most simple answer in the world: no. There are still far more buyers than sellers, and that means a meaningful price decline can't happen. There's just generally not enough supply, says Mark Fleming, chief economist at title insurer First American Financial Corporation, which again, First American is a huge title company. They handle a lot of property transactions and turnovers. And they're probably one of the biggest title companies in the nation, and they have a ton of data. There are more people than housing inventory. It is Econ 101. David Lineger, the founder of real estate brokerage Remax, this guy knows a thing or two, says the sharp rise in mortgage rates skewed the market. Many would-be buyers have been waiting for rates to drop, and that has now begun to happen. But if rates decline very meaningfully, it could send a rush of new buyers flooding into the market, pushing up home prices. Now, this is something that could potentially happen, and we've talked about this. We talked about this, I believe, on either last week's stream or the week before. I can't remember. But if interest rates do go down, we could see a reemergence of buyers engaging into the market and sort of going, okay, hey, interest rates went down. That means affordability went up. I can kind of, get back into potentially the housing market and become a buyer again. I do think that there's potential for that to happen. I don't think it's going to be a tidal wave personally. I think also it's going to depend on your market, right? And I always say this, real estate is hyper local. So, if you're watching this and you're in Los Angeles, that could mean one thing. If you're watching this and you're in Northern California, that could mean something completely different. If you're watching this in Texas or Florida, all of this could go straight out the freaking window, right? So the important thing is you need to pay attention to your local market. Of course, it's good to kind of have your finger on the pulse of the broader, greater market, but at the end of the day, real estate is hyper local. So do I think there could be a big wave of buyers that come into the market if interest rates go down? I think yes. I think we're definitely going to see an uptick in buyer activity. Is it going to be this major tsunami, this major wave? That I don't know about, because I still think a lot of first-time home buyers are just strapped. Even if interest rates did drop 1 full percentage point and went from let's say 6.5 to 5.5, which would be bonkers. That would be huge. I still think that there's obstacles for first-time home buyers, and I do think more will be reengaged, but I don't know if it will be enough to substantially drive pricing up. And I hope that it doesn't, because we really do need pricing to kind of level out and just kind of chill for a little bit. You've got an entire generation of pent-up demand, Lineker says. We're in this fascinating position of tremendous demand and too little inventory. When interest rates do come down, it'll be another boom and bust cycle, according to this guy. And he might not be wrong. He could certainly be correct, right? Nobody really knows what is going to happen with the market. And I don't disagree. I mean, we do have pent-up demand. That's why houses are so expensive, right? So millennials and Gen Z, they're making up the home buying segment right now. Millennials are in the prime home buying age, right? Between kind of 35 and 45. The prime home buying age used to be between 30 and 35. But like a lot of things in life, it's been pushed back, right? We're having kids later, we're finishing college later, we're getting into our careers later, and we're buying homes later. So that prime home buying age has really shifted from 30 to 35 to really now 35 to 40 and into 45. We have millennials that are right in the thick of that age gap. And then we have Gen Z, which is, believe it or not, starting to inch to the cusp of okay, depending on the market that I'm in, maybe Gen Zs are now making up an actual buyer segment. Do I think Gen Zs are making up a segment in major markets New York, LA, Seattle? No, I don't. But they could be making up market share in other areas. So there is a lot of demand. There's a lot of pent-up demand. I don't disagree with that. Nars Yoon notes that some once hot markets like Austin, Texas have seen small declines in prices, but he sees little chance of falling prices on a broader scale. Prices will remain firm and will not decline on a national level. And again, that's because Austin was what I have I didn't invent the name for this, but what I have referred to as a pandemic boom town. If you guys remember, Austin shot up like a rocket during COVID because it's kind of it's this outlier in Texas that's, it's a little bit more liberal. It's a little bit more tech centric. It's a little, keep Austin weird, right? That's what the saying is. They have it painted on the walls there. And a lot of people from your major markets on the coast, like LA, San Francisco, San Diego, Seattle, said, hey, I can go to Austin, buy an awesome house, much more affordable, and I can work remotely at my tech job. And now we're seeing that, Austin is receding from some of the boom era that it saw during the pandemic. So let's look at some key housing market statistics. According to Bankrate's weekly national survey of large lenders, the average mortgage interest rate on a 30-year loan is 6.62% as of August 21st. It's probably a little bit below that right now. Existing home sales rose by 1.3% from June, July. So buyers are still out there. And that's part of the reason that prices are at least going to hold steady, if not increase a little bit. But that still represents a 2.5% decline over July of last year. The nationwide median sale price in July was 422,600. That's the highest July median NAR has ever recorded, and only slightly below June 2024's all-time high of 426,900. In July, the housing market had a 4-month supply of housing inventory, a 19.8% improvement over last year, which is good, right? We need that inventory to come up, but still below the 5 to 6 months needed for a healthy, balanced market. Remember, I said we're at 4 months now. We really need to try to get that back up to 6 months. A total of 31,929 U.S. homes had foreclosure filings, which default notices, scheduled auctions, or bank repossessions. In July 2024, according to the latest numbers from Atom Data Solutions. That's up from last year, but only just barely 0.2%. So essentially, all this foreclosure talk, which was a huge thing. I remember I put out a video at the, was it end of 2022? No, it was end of 2023. I think it was November 2023. And, it was a video very much like this, where I was talking about how the housing market really doesn't look like it's ripe for a crash. And of course, there was a guy that came to the comments and he was like, oh, but foreclosures are going up. They're skyrocketing. Look, month over month foreclosures. Well, that's because we came out of the foreclosure moratorium. And if you still look at a foreclosure chart, it is the lowest it's been in a very, very long time, including pre-pandemic era. So foreclosures are not one of these things that are going to make a big difference in the housing market. And that's largely due in part because 80% of homeowners have interest rates below 6%, 40% of homeowners have interest rates below 4%, and something like 30% of all homes in the United States don't have a mortgage at all. So if you have a really low interest rate, you probably have a very reasonable payment, because that means you've been in the property since at least the pandemic, so since 2020, as long as job loss doesn't just like shoot through the roof. Like job loss would have to go to like 9 and 10 and 11%, which even if we had a recession, job loss probably wouldn't get anywhere close to that. So again, I don't think foreclosures are going to make a substantial difference to pricing, and it certainly is not going to cause a crash. Back in 2005, 2007, the U.S. housing market looked downright frothy before home values crashed, with disastrous consequences. When the real estate bubble burst, the global economy plunged into the deepest downturn since the Great Depression. Now that the recent housing boom has been threatened by skyrocketing mortgage rates and lingering fears of potential recession, buyers and homeowners are asking, when will the housing market crash? However, housing economists agree that it will not crash. Even if prices do fall, the decline will not be as severe as the one experienced during the Great Recession. And again, that's partly because we have so much demand that is waiting to absorb any potential increase in supply. That's going to keep prices where they're at. It's not going to let them fall. And you can see it all the time. People that are so frustrated with the housing market, if prices came down, people want to buy houses. They want to be able to afford them. They want to be able to have secure living. People know, when I say people, I particularly am talking about millennials and Gen Z. They understand that real estate and property ownership offers an opening, an avenue to secure financial wealth, housing security, and all this talk of, millennials and Gen Zs, they don't want to own houses. They don't want to own things. They just want to have experiences. I don't necessarily disagree with them wanting to have experiences, right? But at the same time, I don't know anybody who doesn't want a stable living environment. And I don't know anybody who doesn't want a good investment, which of course a house is both of those things. So the idea that the demand is not there is false. One obvious difference between now and then is that homeowners' personal balance sheets are much stronger today than they were 15 years ago. This is a huge key point. The typical homeowner with a mortgage has stellar credit, a ton of home equity, and a fixed rate mortgage locked in at a low rate. In fact, a New York Times analysis from April found that at the end of 2023, around 70% of U.S. mortgage holders were locked in at rates more than 3 percentage points below the current market rate at that time. So that would be less than 5%, because at that time mortgage rates were about 8%. So that's a huge number of people that have very reasonable locked in rates and tons of equity. Well, how does that factor in? Okay, so for those of you watching that don't know, equity You'll hear it all the time in real estate and in other settings. But equity is the difference between what your home is worth versus what you owe on the loan. So if your home is worth $500,000 and you only owe the bank $400,000, you've got $100,000 in equity. And of course, the lower you owe the bank and the higher your value goes up, the more equity you have. It's that difference. And that equity is what basically your profit that you would make if you were to sell the property. And when you have a ton of equity in a home, it's really, really difficult for that home to be foreclosed on or to have a short sale. A short sale is basically like a precursor to a foreclosure. It's basically when you're like, a short sale means I don't have any equity in the house and I owe more than it's worth, but I'm not behind on the mortgage payments, but I need to sell the house because I can't afford it anymore. So it goes to what's called a short sale. A foreclosure is when the bank says, okay, you're late. You haven't paid us. We're taking the house back. And then we, the bank or the financial institution, we're going to sell the house and out you go. So a little bit different. But when you've got good home equity, like so many Americans do, it's really difficult for those things to happen. What's more, builders remember the Great Recession all too well, and they've been cautious about their pace of construction. The result is an ongoing shortage of homes for sale. We simply don't have enough inventory, Yoon says. Will some markets see a price decline? Yes. But with the supply not being there, the repeat of 30% price decline is highly, highly unlikely. Existing home prices. Economists have long predicted that the housing market would eventually cool as home values became a victim of their own success. After posting a year-over-year decrease in February of 2023 for the first time in more than a decade, the median sale price of a single-family home has been on the rise again, recording annual growth for 13 months in a row and reaching the highest price NAR has ever recorded in June of 2024. So as you can see, this is the median price on March 1st, 2020, which, man, can we all just take a second and go back to March 1st, 2020? That was like the calm before the storm, right? Like we had a normal financial market. We had a normal housing market. Things were looking good. We had normal interest rates. We didn't, COVID was just like COVID. What's this COVID thing? There's a really bad flu going around. Okay, whatever. And what a beautiful time it was. And now here we are as we track it, started to go up in April. And then of course it shot way down in May because people were like, what the heck is going on with COVID? And then all of a sudden, boom, they cut interest rates to stave off any type of recession. You see normal seasonal price decline here as we go into the winter months. And then boom, 2021 is when it started to take off like a rocket because interest rates were so low, near 0% for the overnight bank rate and around 3% for a mortgage rate. And it just took off like a rocket. We started to have some decline here again as we got into the seasonality of the property, of the real estate market. And then boom, again in January, it took off and it's done the same ever since. Overall, home prices have risen far more quickly than incomes. That affordability squeeze is exacerbated by the fact that mortgage rates have more than doubled since August of 2021. Despite prices being high, though, the actual volume of sales has plunged and inventories are still too low to meet demand. Homeowners who locked in 3% mortgage rates several years ago are declining to sell. And who can blame them? With current rates more than double that. So the supply of homes for sale is staying very tight. We've talked about this on the channel. You have that lock-in effect, right? You have people that have really, really low interest rates. They have very affordable payments, and they don't have a huge need to move. So they aren't going to move, right? Why would they pay more for a home that's, probably smaller or in a worse location? And that's adding to the supply constraint issue. We will not have a repeat of the 2008, 2012 housing market crash. You said late last year, there's no risky subprime mortgages that could implode, nor the combination of massive oversupply and overproduction of homes. Ken H. Johnson, a housing economist at Florida Atlantic University, says the housing market is being pulled in two competing directions. I think we're in for a period of relatively flat housing price performance around the country as high mortgage rates put downward pressure on prices, while significant demand from household formation and inventory shortage place upward pressure. He says these forces for now should balance each other out. So let's recap. And for those of you just joining us, this is kind of the recap of the article that we just read on 5 reasons there will be no housing market crash. So here's 5 compelling reasons. Number 1, inventories are still low. We don't need to go back over this. We beat this horse into the ground. We know we don't have enough homes. Builders aren't building quickly enough to meet demand. That's one of the key issues that we have, especially in the more desirable markets, your metropolitan areas. It's really, really hard to build homes. Not only is it really hard to build homes because it's expensive and land is expensive, but it's really hard to build homes because of red tape, bureaucracy, and just government processes, getting permits, getting approval, having environmental regulations and reports and, all of those things that go into it. It's not easy for builders to just go, hey, there's a vacant lot. Let's build 8 houses and sell them. It takes a little bit more than that. Demographic trends are creating new buyers. We've talked about this: millennials, Gen Z, remote workers, immigration, all sorts of these things, these demographics. And demographics are, they're slow moving, but extremely powerful, right? So they have a lot of momentum. So think of it like a cruise ship that's, cruising at full steam and it's out in the ocean. All of a sudden you need to stop immediately, right? It's not going to happen. It takes a long time for that ship to slow down or change direction. And that's what demographics are, right? Demographics are big. They take a long time, but once they got that momentum going, they're going to do what they're going to do. And the fact of the matter is the demographics show that there's a lot of people, and there's a lot of people that want to buy homes and own homes. Therefore, that demand is going to stay high. Lending standards remain strict. And I've talked about this at length. In 2007, liar loans, also referred to as ninja loans, which is no income, no job, or assets. And that was like people would, you would just walk into a bank and be like, hi, my name is Joe. I would like a loan for $450,000 so that I can buy a house. And the bank would be like, yeah, okay, sounds good. Here you go. And they didn't know what your credit score was. They didn't know if you had a job. They didn't know what property you were buying. They were just like, hey, the market's going to go up because we're in this crazy boom. So, you're going to have equity. If you can't afford it, you'll just sell it. And that was the beginning of the end of 2007. That is completely different now. If there's anybody in the chat that has recently gone through the approval process, the pre-approval process, or the buying process, back me up on this. I want to hear from you. Drop a comment. What was the pre-approval process like? It probably wasn't difficult, but it surely was, very detailed and in depth. And you probably had to get your credit pulled multiple times. They probably had to verify your employment multiple times. They probably had to look at tax returns if you're self-employed, going back in your employment history and, hey, do you have a steady job and all of these things, which was not happening in 2007. So lending standards remaining strict is another reason why those people that are qualified to buy homes now, they are actually qualified. They're not just like, yeah, well, I think they can afford it. No, they actually can. Foreclosure activity is muted. We kind of talked about this already. There's no foreclosures flooding the housing market. That's probably not going to happen. Equity is high, which, we refer to as the balance sheet of homeowners. Equity is high. They probably have a very low locked-in interest rate. If they've been in the home since 2019, their payment is probably extremely reasonable for the home that they're in, and they are probably not, exposed to too much risk. All that adds up to a consensus. Yes, home prices are pushing the bounds of affordability, but no, the boom shouldn't end in bust, right? So the next article talks about, this is from Forbes Advisor. This is a good article. I read this one already. This one was updated August 29th. So again, as you guys know, I really like to have recent information. The housing market might finally be entering a transitional phase. So housing market predictions for 2024, when will home prices be affordable again? So we've established that there's not going to be a crash. Again, sorry, crash bros. It's going to kind of put a damper on your whole, all of your material. But if we're not going to have a housing crash, when will homes become more affordable? So let's find out. The housing market might finally be entering a transitional phase. Summer sales have been tepid this far, but there are signs that activity could heat up by the end of the summer as mortgage rates plunge to their lowest level in roughly 15 months. And much needed resale inventory continues to enter the market, giving buyers more options. I love that. Mortgage rates plunge to their lowest level in 15 months, which is true. They've gone down, and they've gone down a decent amount, and they've gone down in a relatively short amount of time. However, plunge is a little bit of a exaggeration, right? But that's what the news does. That's what the media does. I wouldn't say plunge. They've gotten more friendly, and they're definitely in a much better spot than they were 15 months ago. Hey, David, how you doing, buddy? Good to see you. Glad you're here. Other good news for home shoppers is the ongoing decline in the median price for a new home, now below the median resale home price, even as builders continue offering buyer incentives. Look at that. That's good. New home prices are going down. Nonetheless, experts say the housing market will only see renewed momentum once mortgage rates drop enough to ease affordability challenges and incentivize homeowners locked in at low rates to move so inventory grows substantially to meet demand. And that's one of the biggest things that we're hoping for, right? We're hoping that as interest rates go down, it does two things. Number one, it gives first-time buyers or buyers in general a little bit more relief on the affordability spectrum, right? As interest rates go down, theoretically, their monthly payment should go down, the affordability should go up. But the other thing that will do, which will also increase affordability, is that it will get those people that maybe have those 3.5% rates, or they have those 4.5% rates. Maybe they have a 5% rate. Maybe they bought right before interest rates went up, like I did. I bought my second house, or I sold my first house, bought my second house right before interest rates shot up in August of 2021. I actually locked in my rate in like very late July of 2021. So I'm at 5.25%. It's not great, but it certainly isn't terrible. And what we're hoping for is that if rates can get back to, 5.5%, 5.75%, even 6%, those people that may have a 4 or 4.5 might go, hey, you know what? I know that my interest rate's going to go up 1%, but I have so much equity in the house. I can put down a nice big down payment on the new house. And guess what? 5 years ago, I wasn't married, but now I am. 5 years ago, we only had one kid, and, now we have 3 kids. Or 5 years ago, I was living in a condo I bought this condo and now I need a house. And we're hoping that by lowering those rates, it'll help first-time home buyers, but it will also motivate people that have been feeling that lock-in effect to unlock themselves, quite frankly, and put their home onto the market and hopefully start to get that turnover going, open up some inventory for people so that they can, move and have a little bit more to choose from. And again, as inventory goes up, hopefully pricing will stabilize or even decrease a little bit. Housing market forecast for 2024. U.S. home prices posted a 5.9% annual gain for May, down from a 6.4% annualized gain in April, according to the latest S&P CoreLogic Case-Shiller Home Price Index. Affordability is the main constraint on the housing market. Lisa Sturt-Avant, chief economist at Bright MLS, said in an emailed statement, the market will move toward more of a balanced housing market in the second half of the year, but prospective home buyers will still face competition, as we've kind of talked about. Though affordability obstacles persist for buyers, other indicators suggest that the market is tilting toward buyers. It is. Zillow reports that roughly 25% of the listings saw price cuts in June. That's a great indication for buyers. Again, that's only going to be in some markets, though. It's not going to be in all markets. The last time the rate was this high for cuts this time of year was 2018. That's good news. And of course, meanwhile, we are still hopeful that the Fed will finally cut the federal funds rate in September, which is looking extremely, extremely likely. Will the housing market finally recover in 2024? For housing recovery to occur, several conditions must unfold. For the best possible outcome, we'd first need to see inventories of homes for sale turn considerably higher. This additional inventory in turn would ease the upward pressure on home prices. We've kind of talked about this before. NAR practice changes are underway. What buyers and sellers need to know. This is a live stream all in of itself. I'm happy to kind of cover this. I've hit on it in some of the live streams in the past. There was a big settlement earlier this year, back in, oh gosh, I think May or June, that basically said, hey, now we're going to institute 2 rules. And this is the National Association of Realtors instituting these rules, not local real estate agents, not states, not counties, nothing like that. This is coming from the National Association of Realtors, and even furthermore, the Department of Justice, a federal agency, that said essentially, guess what? Now, if you're a buyer and you want to take a look at a house with a real estate agent, you got to sign a contract. Whereas before that didn't have to happen. If you want to see a house, you could call up an agent and say, hey, my name is Jonathan, and I'm interested in seeing this house at 123 First Street. Can you show it to me? There's a pretty good chance that real estate agents could say, yeah, sure, I'll show it to you, because, hey, you might want to buy it, right? Now that's not going to happen anymore. Now, in order to see any house, any property, even if it's a virtual showing and you're a buyer, you're going to have to sign an agreement with a buyer's agent. It doesn't necessarily mean it's an exclusive agreement. It doesn't mean that that agreement is good for a year or 2. It might only be good for that one day or for that one house, but that's one of the changes. So if your buyer's out there and an agent or your agent is saying, hey, we need to sign this form before I can show you properties, they're not trying to rope you into anything. They're not trying to lock you into an agreement. They are simply trying to abide by the new rules. Are the new rules good? Are they bad? I don't know. It kind of depends, right? It depends on who you ask and what your feeling is. It's all very new, so we'll have to see how it shakes out. The second thing that came from the settlement was that now sellers don't necessarily have to agree up front to a commission for the buyer's agent. So before, most sellers were counseled by their agents to say, hey, give me this commission percentage or this amount, and then I the listing agent need the amount to be here, because I'm going to then offer a portion of it, usually half, not all the time, but usually half, to the agent that brings the buyer. And the seller said, okay, fine, I'll pay you your 5 or 6 or 8% or 4% or whatever it is. Let's just say 5, because it's a good number. I'll pay you the 5%. You keep 2.5. You give out 2.5 to the buyer's agent. Great, it's good. And the buyers didn't have to worry about paying their agent. Well, now that's not happening. Sellers now, when they sign a listing agreement, when they sign a contract with their listing agent, there is no area in there for them to say, hey, I'm going to give the buyer's agent this much. So that means it's now negotiable, and buyers could potentially be on the hook to pay their agent. Because if seller says, hey, guess what? I'm not paying a buyer's agent. I don't have to do that, which, by the way, they didn't have to before. But I don't have to do that. I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do that. So buyers, good luck. Well, that means that those buyers that are interested in that property with that seller, they're going to have to compensate their agent on their own, which could potentially raise that barrier to entry a little bit for buyers, further adding to the cost. So again, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, I've got my own opinions on it, but let me know what you guys think. And we're certainly going to see how it changes the real estate landscape. All right, David, what do you got for me? Joe, you have any pushback from buyer clients who are hesitant to sign a buyer broker agreement? That's a great question. A little bit, right? Like, I've had a couple instances where buyers are like, what? Yeah, I kind of heard something about this, but I'm not sure. And then once you explain it to them and you educate them, it's like, oh, okay, I guess that kind of makes sense. If sellers have contracts with agents, buyers have contract with agents. And at the end of the day, David, if I'm working with someone and they're really hesitant to sign a buyer broker agreement, like, how serious of a buyer are they actually, right? So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing when you come across someone that, isn't interested in signing a buyer broker agreement, because I'm finding that if they're serious buyers and you explain it to them well, most of them don't have an issue, especially when you explain to them that there's a very good chance that you're going to be able to negotiate their fee to be paid for by the seller still. Then like, oh, okay, that makes sense because I don't have the money to pay you. But heck, if you are able to negotiate and get the seller to pay for it, great, that sounds good. So I haven't had too many issues with it. Hey, Dominic, hope everything's good in Arizona. Can that type of agent compensation be lumped into the loan amount? The short answer is yes and no. And I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. So no, in the sense that if a buyer and a buyer's agent agree to, let's just make it a flat fee to make it easy. Let's just say $10,000, right? So the buyer's agent says, my fee is $10,000 to represent you on the biggest purchase of your life that's going to be worth $500,000 and go up from there. And the buyer goes, okay, hey, that's a lot of money, but I really want good representation. I don't want to mess this up. I really, really want an expert on my side to negotiate and look after my best interests. So I will pay you the $10,000. Now, if that buyer goes to the lender and says, hey, lender, I don't have 10 grand. So I need to like roll this into my loan or wrap it into my loan. That's not going to happen. That's not going to work, at least not yet. That could change. However, where it could be worked into is you go this, you do it this way. Hey, Mr. Seller, I have a client. He wants to buy your house. I understand your house is $500,000. We're going to submit an offer for $500,000. And I'm going to ask that you, Mr. Seller, pay my fee to represent the buyer of $10,000. And the seller goes, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not paying you. It's your problem. Well, what you could do is you could increase the offer to $510,000 and then say, now pay me $10,000. And now that $510,000 will be wrapped up into the mortgage because that is now the purchase price of the property. The one caveat to that is the fact that the house must appraise at that $510,000 price. So you're going to need to pay attention. Your agent's going to need to pay attention to the area in which that you're buying, because if you try to tack on a $20,000 commission to the sale price, but the home can barely appraise for the asking price, then that's not really going to work. So hopefully that answers your question, David. True. Yes, exactly. Right. If they're not serious, then don't sign the agreement. But if they're serious and they want to work with me, then they're probably going to sign the agreement. I can see a first-time buyer who can barely scrape the other 5% having problems paying someone as skilled as you. Well, thank you, Dominic. And you're exactly right. And this is one of the reasons that this lawsuit, I thought, was actually a detriment to the buyer. And of course, as always, lawyers got involved. They made a ton of money. It was a $418 billion settlement, 418 million, sorry, not billion, $418 million settlement. Lawyers got huge payouts. Individual homeowners didn't get hardly anything. I think somebody did the math, and like each individual homeowner that was a part of this class action lawsuit, I think made about $25 from the settlement, and the lawyers got paid hundreds of millions of dollars. And this is why I kind of felt like, man, this is not good for the home buyer, because now it is on the buyer. However, now it's a negotiable item. It's part of the, it's part of the transaction, and it can be negotiated. And what I honestly think will happen is I honestly think that effectively things will remain basically the same. I think that sellers are still going to be willing to compensate the buyer's agent, because like I said, if a seller out there says, I'm not paying the buyer's agent anything, think about how unattractive that makes their home look to home buyers, right? If you were looking at two homes, both $500,000, both in the neighborhood that you liked, both great candidates to be your home, to be your purchase, and one of them is going to cost you $15,000 more than the other because the seller says, I'm not helping you out with anything, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. Well, then naturally you're going to be diverted towards the one where the seller goes, yeah, you know what? I will help you out because I want to get my home sold. And there's a chance that they're going to have multiple people interested. They're going to get multiple bids, and the price could even go up. So I agree. What this does is this puts a big burden on low-income buyers, middle-income buyers, and first-time home buyers, because they're the ones that have a hard time scraping it together. And I actually feel that this will hurt minority buyers a lot. As we know in the country, minorities have had a historically very, very, very difficult time to home ownership and wealth. And now what we're going to see is we're going to start to see low-income buyers, minority buyers have an even harder time, because now they're going to, quite frankly, they're going to have really, really bottom of the barrel representation. They're going to have agents that are part-time, don't know what they're doing. They're, hey, yeah, I'll be your agent for $2,500. And people are like, hey, great, $2,500. I guess I can afford that. And they're going to get terrible representation. Remember, at the end of the day, you absolutely get what you pay for, and you should absolutely be interviewing your agent and seeing if they're worth that money, right? So yes, I'm glad that you see. That's good. Yes, wait for the Chinese money. Exactly. Yes. We are still seeing sellers willing to offer compensation to buyers. Yep. And that's the same thing that we're seeing. And you know what would be interesting is that if this market ever flips to a buyer heavy market, I think sellers are going to be putting a foot in their mouth, because what's going to happen when buyers agents go, you know what, your house has been on the market for 84 days, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, and I've got a buyer, and I have a buyer that's willing to give you your price, but you're going to have to pay me a 3.5% commission. Well, if that seller who's had a home on the market for 84 days needs to sell their home because they have to relocate for work, or they need to downsize, or they need to upsize, or whatever the case may be, they're going to go, okay, fine. I do see a period in this world where buyers agents will actually be able to be paid more from this, because they won't be constrained to what the listing agent was able to negotiate during the listing process, if that makes sense. So we will certainly have to see how it shakes out. So that's all we're going to talk about when it comes to the NAR settlement. If you've got more questions, just put them into the chat. Let me know. Thank you. I appreciate that you agree with me, David. If you've got other questions about that, put them in the chat. So will there be sufficient supply to reduce prices? No, not really. This is kind of a really cool graph. This is one that I wanted to bring up. So this typical US home value by states. So, 5 years ago versus now. And the next article that I have also has a really, really good graphic that basically shows this same data, but in a different and sort of more digestible way. But California 5 years ago, this is insane. Of course, this is California, right? We all know California is insane. And I say that as a lifelong Californian sitting in California right now. Today, the average value of a house is $810,000. 5 years ago, it was $555,000. Bonkers. That's crazy. And then you have areas like Massachusetts who's seen a huge gain. 5 years ago, 438. Now it's 657. And then you've got some areas, West Virginia, not a huge difference, but still an increase. And even if you look at some of these areas where you think, oh, there's not a lot of increase, Oklahoma, 140 to 210. That's some pretty big price increases. Hawaii, again, on the same lines as California, going from 706 to 991. I mean, heck, even Alaska's had gains from 316 to 378. It's pretty crazy to think about those price increases over just 5 years. And this is this right here, this whole graphic, all of this data, all this information is a great demonstration of what I said early in the stream, where I said, it's not about timing the market, it's about time in the market. Imagine if you would have bought a home in anywhere 5 years ago, right? Now, granted, we've had a unicorn market. We've had a market that has gone up a ton in value over that time. But gosh, I mean, think about this. Even in West Virginia, you went from 121,000 to 169,000. I mean, we're talking about making some decent money, in a very short amount of time. That's pretty good gains. I mean, Minnesota from 261 to 346, over almost $100,000 you could have made in 5 years in equity. Crazy stuff. Hey, John, hope you're doing well. Thanks for tuning in and watching. Hi, Joe. Have you seen any instances of young first-time buyers resorting to negatively amortizing loans, or even compiling funds for down payments via credit cards and other borrowing? Money is tight. I haven't seen a lot of that. For the most part, unless you are getting a private loan through like a very specific lender, or maybe a family member potentially. However, most of the time now, with the lending standards that we have, the lending sector really tried very hard to get rid of the really crappy loans. So yeah, can you still get an adjustable rate? Yeah, you can. And that's always been a thing. But to qualify for those loans is much more difficult. And for the most part now, most people are just going to settle for the 30-year fixed rate loan with, the lock-in mortgage rate with a very scheduled amortization rate and schedule that's going to be straightforward for most people. So I'm not seeing a lot of that. I'm also not seeing people tap into down payments tap into credit cards for down payments, simply for the fact that most of the time credit cards have a pretty low cash limit, right? So you can usually, for the most part, only pull out, get maybe 5, 10, 15K in cash from a credit card. And that's if you have a pretty high credit limit. And on top of that, you're going to pay an insane interest rate on that cash advance. So, and you know what, if you could actually get, if a $10,000 down payment could actually get you something, then maybe I could see people doing that. But that's just a drop in the bucket. People now at this rate need a minimum, 30, 40, 50, $60,000 down just to have 5% of the average purchase price of a home. So I'm not seeing that. Thankfully, what I am seeing mostly is I'm seeing people get gift funds, mostly from baby boomer parents. Baby boomers have a lot of wealth to pass on, and now it is not uncommon for a lot of first-time home buyers to be gifted down payment funds. It's not uncommon for boomers to maybe take out a mortgage on their house. So like, let's say a boomer parent, and I use the term boomer affectionately. If you've watched the stream before, I really hate the generational animosity between boomers and millennials and Gen Z. So, but let's say there's a boomer parent out there who has a house that's paid off, or has a very low mortgage. Let's just say it's paid off, and the house is worth $600,000. Well, they could easily take out a mortgage for $100,000, give that to their kid, or a home equity line of credit, give it to their kid, and put it into real estate. Normally, I would say the only good reason to use a HELOC and pull money out is to either improve real estate or buy more real estate. So I do think if you're a parent, you're considering a HELOC, as long as you've vetted the purchase of your child well, and you think it's a smart thing and they're responsible, they have a stable job, they can make that monthly payment, I don't think it's a bad thing, because taking that money out of one property and putting it into another property that's not going to be a bad move, because that property is going to appreciate, right? And hopefully your son or daughter is going to pay you back, hopefully with interest. Maybe you come up with a profit sharing, revenue sharing example, to where, hey, you know what, if I'll give you all of your money back plus a percentage of the appreciation on my property when I can pay it off. So I'm seeing more of that. I'm seeing boomer parents take out a line of credit or an equity line, or a second mortgage position, and say, hey, you know what, I'll pay the $200 a month. I've got tons of equity in the house. It's not going to break the bank for me, and it's going to get my child into stable, secure housing that's going to build them generational wealth. That's what I'm seeing more of. Home builder sentiment ticks down. We kind of talked about this a little bit. Home builders, they go up and down. They fluctuate. Sometimes they have a month where there's huge housing starts. Sometimes they have months where there's no housing starts. And they're very temperamental with the market, what the market's doing, what the financial market's doing. So if interest rates do go down, that will make capital cheaper for builders for sure. And I think there will be an uptick in home building, which is a good thing. So we've been talking about this for a little while. I want to jump over to this one before we kind of conclude, and I'm going to share this tab. This is from the Housing Wire. Housing Wire is a really, really good website for housing data. I'm going to blow this up a little bit. This one's talking about how now 8 states now have more unsold inventory than in 2019. So wrap your head around this, folks. So 8 states actually have more available property for purchase than they did before the pandemic. It's interesting. I kind of hypothesized a few years ago that we were going to start to refer to, COVID as like the pre-COVID era and the pre-COVID era and the post-COVID era, kind of like we do with like AM or PM or BC and AD or whatever, right? And I think that's kind of what's going to happen now. So like the pre-COVID era, we're now comparing with this data from today in terms of housing inventory. And there is some states that are showing some signs that, hey, there's even more inventory than there was before COVID, which could be a good thing. However, there are 40% more homes on the market now than last year, but it's not spread evenly. And that's the key thing. Unsold inventory of homes on the market has been climbing in the US for 2 years, right along with rising mortgage rates. In general, inventory rises with rates because more expensive money slows demand. When demand slows, inventory grows. According to Altos Research, there are 40% more homes on the market at the end of August 2024 than there were last year at this time. That means currently just over 700,000 single-family homes are unsold, with about 10% of those going into contract each week and another 75,000 new listings. But still, there are about 300,000 fewer homes on the market now than in August 2019. Inventory is climbing, but it's still pretty restricted. And importantly, inventory isn't growing everywhere equally. Florida and Arizona have 70% more homes unsold on the market now than last year, while New York has only 10% more. Again, so this is going to be more towards those like pandemic boomtown areas, which Arizona kind of falls into. Areas like Phoenix got a nice bump in housing activity during the pandemic because it was very affordable. But I don't think Arizona is going to be hit quite like maybe Texas or Florida could be in terms of receding prices and booming inventory. And I think the reason for that is because Arizona is going to continue getting California transplants. Obviously it's right next door to California. It's drivable. You can theoretically drive from Los Angeles to Phoenix without too much fuss. You can fly very easily. So I do think that Arizona is going to continue to see people go, you know what, I just can't do it in California. I can't afford to live here. I can't afford insurance. I can't afford the cost of real estate. I'm going to Arizona. I think that's going to continue. And I think that's going to sort of mitigate some of the pandemic boom and bust that we're seeing in Texas and Idaho and Florida and places like that. While every state in the country has more homes unsold on the market than last year, 2023 wasn't normal. We were still emerging from the crazy pandemic market. So rather than comparing to last year, the closest we get to a normal market is to use 2019 as a baseline. And 8 states have more unsold inventory in 2019. Meanwhile, some states, especially in the Midwest and Northeast, still have barely more available inventory than during the pandemic. Illinois and Connecticut have almost 75% fewer homes for sale now than in 2019. So again, as they were talking about, it's not spread out evenly. So here you're going to see a chart. Let me make this a little bit smaller so we get the whole thing. Oh, there's really no in between apparently. But so this is single family inventory change versus 2019. So a negative number means there are less homes available now, today, than in comparison to this time in 2019. And a positive number means that there is more homes. So again, let's start with the pandemic boom towns, which is Texas, Florida, Idaho. And as you can see, they're among the highest. Oklahoma's a little bit of an outlier, very, very high, almost 20% more homes available today, right now, than in 2019. Florida, 8.6% more homes. Texas, again, 18.9%. Idaho, 17.1%. What is this? Colorado? They didn't label them. I'm pretty sure this is Colorado. 1.1% a negative. So, there's not more homes, but there's barely less homes available. So this is becoming, so if you're a buyer, how do you interpret this? Well, obviously the states that have plus percentages, positive percentages, these are going to be the areas where, you could potentially get a deal or at least have a little bit less competition, have homes that are a little bit more affordable because there's a little bit more inventory. The homes that are doing the worst, look at this in New York, negative 57.2% in inventory from August 2019 to today. California, almost 30%. I mean, even Alaska, like who's moving to Alaska? Negative 6.4%. No offense to my Alaska people. It's the great frontier. It's the last wilderness. But still, I mean, that's crazy that there's still even less inventory than Alaska. So this is a really good demonstration. I mean, look at this. This is Illinois, 73% less in inventory available in Illinois. Pretty wild stuff. New Jersey also just getting hit ridiculously hard. Minus 67%. Man, tough time to buy for New Jersey. A lot of the Northeast, crazy. I mean, negative 49, negative 53, negative 40, negative 59, negative 74, negative 67, negative 59, and kind of your Maryland, Washington, D.C. area, just absolutely nuts. And this right here, if I had to sum up in one picture, in one graphic of why there isn't going to be a housing crash, this is it. This is it. This is what I would show people. All right, David, you're going to test my geography skills. I am decent at geography, but Nebraska on this map, I'm going to have to pull up. I don't have my phone's my camera right now. Let me pull up state map because I want to make sure I know which one Nebraska is. I don't want to point to the wrong thing like a doofus. Let me pull up image really quick. Nebraska. Okay, so you're right. Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska. Okay, Oklahoma. Okay, Nebraska. Is this right, David? Can you confirm that this is your state? Negative 9.6%. So, Nebraska showing signs that it's a little bit more reasonable and realistic in terms of inventory as opposed to some of these other states, but still almost down 10% from August 2019 to August 2024. So definitely still some up. What's interesting here is Nebraska is minus 9.6%. But if you look at some of the states around it, which what did I say this one was? Let me go back to my map. Kansas. You go back down to Kansas, it's minus almost 40%. It's crazy to think that Kansas minus 48%. It's just next door, and Nebraska is 9.6%. And then if you go up, you have South Dakota at minus 21%. That's interesting to me that you have some states around just right next to it that border it that have so much more inventory than Nebraska. I really do wonder what that's about. I really wonder why Nebraska is doing a little bit better than South Dakota and Kansas. That's interesting to me, and I don't know why. If anybody has any hypotheses or theories, put it in the chat. Let's hear them. So this is why I think that we're not going to any type of crash anytime soon. And this is a great example. So you can show all the crash bros out there. This is how much less inventory that we had in 2019. It's going to be really tough to have a housing crash when you don't have any supply. Why does it matter? One reason to pay attention to these inventory trends is that the faster we get back to normal markets, the better the environment will be for home buyers, which I do agree we need to get there. Buyers have more selection with less upward price pressure in an affordability challenged market. Another interpretation of these inventory trends is more bearish. That is, areas with greater supply of unsold homes are more likely to have a downward price adjustments. For housing market watchers who are expecting home prices to decline, they're looking for areas where supply and demand grow significantly in balance. These 8 states are the leading candidates. So yeah, I guess, if you're talking about what are the leading candidates for a housing crash in these areas, I would start with the states in pink as opposed to the states in the more red color. And this is a great example of why I say real estate is hyper local. Now we're looking at this from a state average. So this is local. Hyper local would be like looking at by county or by town, right? This is more localized. And if you look, this is why I say it's hyper local, because in an area like let me see what state. Again, I want to refer to the right state. I believe it's New Mexico. New Mexico is down 25% in inventory, but right next door in Texas, it's up almost 19% in inventory, right? And then you go over to, Louisiana, and it's minus 9.9% in inventory. You have Nevada, which has negative 36% inventory compared to 2019. You go next door to Utah, and it's 0.5% more. So that's why it really depends on where you're at. If you're in Illinois and you're, talking to or listening to someone that's talking about Florida or Texas, of course, things are looking very, very different. And that's why you have to be very, very particular about the data that you're paying attention to, because it's not all the same, right? It's not all equitable. Why do these states have such inventory growth when much of the Midwest and Northeast have barely budged off the pandemic lows of inventory? The answer seems to lie in migration patterns. During the pandemic, I have a feeling we're going to get to pandemic boomtown talk here. During the pandemic, most of these states were inbound migration states. People moved from the Northeast to Florida or moved from California to Texas and Idaho. Migration is within the U.S. from state to state. Don't confuse this trend with immigration from outside to the country. from outside the country. These migration patterns were already underway and they were turbocharged during the pandemic. Home builders leaned into the trends that have been building a lot of homes in these parts of the country. And we knew this. We knew that, before the pandemic even hit, we knew that there were Californians going, I'm going to Texas, I'm going to Arizona, I'm going to Boise. People before the pandemic could afford houses, but it still wasn't easy, right? And so a lot of people set these migration patterns before COVID, and then they were just really dramatized by COVID when housing prices in the major areas got so expensive and people wanted to buy something. So since 2022, Americans are staying put. So if Chicago has a long history of outbound migration, these homes would normally be listed for sale. Those Chicagoans would normally be buying a home in Dallas. The normal Chicago housing market assumes a certain outbound flow. The Dallas housing market assumes a normal inbound flow. When that flow stops, there are fewer homes sold in Chicago and more unbought homes in Dallas. So interesting, the connection between migration patterns and housing inventory. According to John Burns Real Estate Consulting, Austin, Texas in 2024 actually has net outbound migration, perhaps for the first time in 15 years. More Americans are moving out of Austin than in, at least for this stretch in 2024. Idaho and Utah famously had dramatic migration from California during the pandemic. The fire hose was slowed to a trickle. Why outbound migration is just not slowing inbound migration that affects the inventory in these states. The costs of homeownership are climbing too. Texas in particular is a high tax state for real estate, which it is. Anybody who's familiar with Texas real estate knows that, boy, those property taxes are real. They can practically reassess you at any time, multiple times a year. There's no cap into how much your property tax can go up. And it has really put the squeeze on a lot of people here in California. We have a proposition that was voted into law by the California citizens. Gosh, this was back in 1976 or 78. I can't remember exactly what it was, but here in California, one of the great laws that we have on the books is that our property taxes can only increase a max of 2% every year. So yes, property taxes will continue to go up, but they go up at a very, very slow rate that allows people to adjust to those small increases. Unlike Texas, where there is no cap and they can, quite frankly, go up very quickly and cause a lot of financial hardship on people. So what happens next? The great stay seems to be the product of higher mortgage rates and a cautious outlook on the economy. Businesses are afraid to hire too much and employees are afraid to quit the good gig they have. Homeowners have their well-documented mortgage rate lock in effect after a decade of ultra low mortgage rates. The macroeconomic trends that finally motivate the labor market are probably the same trends that motivate migration and home buying in the destination states. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. As these 8 states, are these 8 states the harbinger of inventory gains or of imbalances that lead to a home price correction? Or as the business cycle turns, do these extreme conditions gradually ease? If we're lucky and we've passed the peak of interest rates, then the great stay trends may also be at their peak now. That implies that in 2025, inventory tightens in the destination states and probably eases a bit in the outbound states. So certainly very interesting. And this graphic is great. It really is. And this is a great summation as to what's going on and where and why there's probably not going to be a huge change in the market that we're seeing. So, well, guys, I hope you enjoyed the stream. And if you did, please drop a like on the stream. It really helps out the channel. It helps out my stream. It helps me out. It doesn't cost you anything. And if you like the information, please consider subscribing if you haven't. I appreciate the people that come back week after week. David, Dominic, John, all you guys are great. I really appreciate you guys hanging out. We'll be back next week for another stream. I don't know exactly what the topic is going to be yet, but if you ever have a suggestion, pop it in the comments below. So don't forget, like the stream, subscribe to the channel. It doesn't cost anything. And if you're looking for a real estate agent, whether that's somebody locally in the Southern California area where I can help you out directly, or if you're looking for a well-qualified, smart, savvy agent anywhere in the United States, whether you're looking to buy or sell, drop a comment, shoot me an email, send me a text message, and let me know. I have a huge network of real estate agents all across the country that are willing and able to help you. And I can make sure that you get matched with the right agent for what you are trying to do. And especially now that buyers might be on the hook for compensating their agents, you want to make sure that if you're going to pay an agent, you're going to pay the right agent. So I hope all of you guys enjoyed the stream. Have a great night, and I will see you next